London, 1816. There are winters in this city that chill your hands, and winters that chill your name. Tonight, the tun gathers beneath chandeliers so bright they could blind a sensible woman into believing in happily ever after. Tonight, in a ballroom fragrant with roses and rumour, a young lady stands at the edge of everything she was promised since childhood. Lady Sophie. She was raised like a hymn, sung softly in a drawing room, with patience, with grace, with a faith in her family's choices. Her engagement was not a surprise to her. It was a certainty, a contract made long before she could spell the word love, polished into a dream through years of careful hope. And yet the hook of this story is not that she stopped loving him. It is that she could no longer survive the way she loved him, in silence, in smallness, in the shadow of his contempt. So she does the most dangerous thing a gentle woman can do in a world built to reward obedience. She breaks the engagement, not with fireworks, not with fury, with the quiet violence of a smile that pretends it does not bleed. Because some lies are not born of cruelty. Some are born from the desperate instinct to protect a heart that has been bruised so politely no one notices the bruises at all, and that lie awakens him. Because the Duke had expected Sophie to endure. He had expected her to wait. He had never expected her to change, and if you are wondering what happens when a proud Duke realizes the diamond of the season has decided she no longer needs his approval, keep your eyes on the dance floor. This is a story about scandal and healing, about love that stumbles through betrayal and finds redemption anyway. And somewhere beneath the music, hidden like a spark under velvet, there is a flicker of hope. Not loud enough to be called a promise, but bright enough to be dangerous. Sophie watched the ballroom from behind a fan that did not actually hide anything. It only gave her hands something to do besides tremble. She had always loved ballrooms in theory. The symmetry, the ritual, the way people moved as if they'd rehearsed their charm for weeks. As a girl, she imagined her engagement announcement as a shining moment, her parents proud, society delighted, her future husband offering his arm as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She had imagined the Duke would look at her and see something worth cherishing. Instead, he looked at the entire arrangement as if it were a tedious duty written in ink by other people. The Duke of Renford arrived precisely when the room had decided it was ready to be impressed. He was tall, controlled, and beautiful in the most unfair way, as if arrogance had been carved into his cheekbones. He wore black and midnight blue like he owned the color. His expression was a composed mask that made other men straighten their spines and other women forget their own names. Sophie's heart did what it always did around him. It tried to be brave, and it failed. But tonight, she did not step forward. Tonight, she did not glow with hopeful obedience. Tonight, she stayed exactly where she was, calm as a lake that had frozen on top. Her mother, Lady Harrowmere, leaned close. Sophie, smile, people are watching. I know, Sophie said softly. I am letting them. Her mother blinked as if Sophie had spoken a foreign language. What does that mean? It means, Sophie murmured, I am finished performing for their comfort. Lady Harrowmere's mouth tightened. Do not choose tonight to be difficult. Sophie did not look away from the Duke. I am not choosing tonight. Tonight is choosing me. Across the room, the Duke greeted a cluster of gentlemen. His father's allies, his mother's friends, the families stitched together by shared influence. He did not look at Sophie at all, not once. Not even the polite, obligatory glance of a man about to marry a woman everyone said was a treasure. Sophie had once made excuses for him. He is shy, she told herself. He is thoughtful. He is simply careful with emotions. Then she overheard him. 3 weeks ago, at a dinner where she was seated too far away to interrupt, but close enough to hear. A friend had teased him about the wedding, and the Duke had said, with a laugh so cold it made the candles feel insulting, "I would rather be sentenced to a lifetime of my mother's opinions than a lifetime of that arrangement." That arrangement, not the marriage, not Sophie. That arrangement. As if she were a piece of furniture his parents had ordered without consulting him. Sophie had gone to the powder room and vomited quietly, then returned to the table with a smile so practiced it deserved applause. She did not cry until the carriage ride home, and she did not stop loving him. That was the cruelest part, because she still loved him. She loved the glimpse of softness she once saw when he spoke to a child at a charity event. She loved the way his mouth fought against smiling, as if joy were an enemy he could not afford. She loved the intelligence in his eyes, sharp and restless, as though the world were always disappointing him and he could not decide whether to punish it for that. She loved him the way young women love, fiercely, quietly, and at their own expense. But now she understood something. Love that requires you to shrink is not devotion, it is surrender. And Sophie had decided she would rather be alone than be a woman who begs for crumbs in a gilded cage. The orchestra began a new set. Couples flooded the floor. Sophie turned her head slightly and watched as a young debutante tripped over her own hem. Her partner caught her, grinning, and she laughed with relief. The entire moment was simple and human. Sophie's chest tightened. She realized she had been longing for something even more basic than romance. She had been longing for kindness. Someone approached from her left. Lady Sophie. The voice was familiar, smooth with practiced confidence. Lord Ashford, a viscount with too much charm and too little discretion, bowed low. "You look as though you are contemplating whether to set this ballroom aflame." Sophie's lips curved faintly. "Would that be considered improper?" "It would be considered memorable," he said. "And I support women who make life interesting." Sophie lowered her fan. "Do you support women who refuse to be humiliated?" Ashford's expression shifted, curiosity sharpening. "That sounds like an alarm bell disguised as a question." Sophie met his gaze. "Perhaps it is." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Everyone says you are the sweetest creature in London, that you have no sharp edges at all." Sophie's smile became gentler, and therefore more dangerous. "Everyone is rarely correct." Ashford blinked, then laughed under his breath. "I do believe the tongue is about to discover you have teeth." "Let them," Sophie said. Ashford glanced toward the Duke across the room. "And will His Grace survive this discovery?" Sophie's gaze followed his. The Duke still had not looked at her. She said, very calmly, "His Grace will learn what it is to notice what he took for granted." Ashford's eyes widened with delighted shock. "Oh, this is going to be a season." Sophie turned, as if the conversation had ended. "Enjoy it." Before Ashford could reply, Sophie's mother touched her elbow, nails pressing through silk. "Sophie," Lady Harrowmere hissed, "you are drawing attention." Sophie looked at her mother. "Yes, that man is gossip," her mother snapped. "Do not encourage him." Sophie's eyes did not harden. They softened, which was worse. "Mother, I have spent my entire life being encouraged in one direction. Forgive me if I find it refreshing to turn my head." Lady Harrowmere inhaled sharply. "Do you want scandal?" Sophie thought of the Duke's voice. That arrangement. She thought of the long years of dreaming, of writing his name in the margins of her prayer book like a foolish girl. She thought of the way she had learned to swallow disappointment with a smile. "No," Sophie said, "I want dignity." Her mother stared, as if she had never actually seen her daughter before. "You are tired. You will regret speaking like this." Sophie nodded once. "Perhaps, but regret is a quieter companion than humiliation." Lady Harrowmere opened her mouth, and then the room shifted. It was subtle, like a breeze passing through silk. The Duke of Renford had turned. His gaze moved across the ballroom, scanning faces with that detached authority he wore like a second coat. Then it stopped. On Sophie. It was the first time all evening, and something changed in his expression, not warmth, never warmth, but a sharpness, as if he'd noticed a detail in a painting that didn't belong. Sophie held his gaze. She did not look away. She did not blush. She did not offer him the shy, hopeful smile he was accustomed to receiving from women who wanted his approval. Instead, she gave him something else. A polite nod, the kind you give a stranger. The Duke's jaw tightened. Lady Harrowmere whispered, urgent, "There. Smile. That is your future husband." Sophie's voice was almost tender. "Not anymore." Her mother froze. "What did you say?" Sophie turned, still calm. "I said, not anymore." The words were so soft they did not cause a scene, but Sophie felt the air crackle anyway, like the moment before lightning strikes. Lady Harrowmere's eyes went wide with alarm. "Sophie!" Sophie placed her fan on the table beside her. "I have already sent the letter." Her mother's face drained of colour. "What letter?" Sophie's throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "The letter ending the engagement. It was delivered this afternoon." Lady Harrowmere swayed slightly, as if Sophie had slapped her. You cannot do that." Sophie swallowed. "I already did." Her mother's voice became a furious whisper. "Do you understand what you have done? Your father—" "I understand exactly," Sophie said. "I understand that I have been faithful to a dream that was never returned to me. I understand I have been trying to make a home out of a place where I am tolerated, not wanted." Lady Harrowmere's eyes glistened with anger, fear, or both. "This is madness." Sophie's lips trembled just once. "No, madness would be staying." Her mother grabbed her wrist, nails biting. "If you embarrass this family—" Sophie looked down at her mother's hand. "You are hurting me." Lady Harrowmere released her, startled. Sophie inhaled slowly. Then she lifted her chin and stepped away from her mother, away from the safety of obedience, away from the girl she had been. She walked toward the ballroom doors, not running, not dramatic, just leaving. Halfway there, a figure intercepted her path. The Duke. He moved with the contained speed of a predator that did not like surprises. His face was composed, but his eyes were not. There was a restless intensity there, as if something inside him had been provoked. "Lady Sophie," he said, voice low. A word. Sophie stopped. She did not curtsy. The smallest rebellion, and yet it felt like a revolution. "Your Grace," she replied, polite as ice. His gaze flicked over her, her posture, her expression, the strange new stillness in her. "You are leaving early." "Yes." His mouth tightened. "Why?" Sophie looked at him with an almost gentle calm. "Because I no longer enjoy pretending." For the first time in years, something cracked in his composure. "Pretending what?" Sophie held his gaze. Her heart beat hard, painful, alive. "Pretending," she said softly, "that you do not despise what you have been promised." The Duke's eyes narrowed. "You presume much." Sophie's smile was small and sad. "Do I?" A muscle jumped in his jaw. "If you have something to say it plainly." Sophie's chest rose and fell. Then she did it. She spoke plainly. "I ended our engagement." The Duke went very still. The sounds of the ballroom seemed to dull around them, as if London itself leaned closer to listen. His voice came out dangerously quiet. "You did what?" Sophie met his gaze without flinching. "I ended it. Today." A beat. Then his lips parted slightly, like a man who had rehearsed 1,000 indifferences and found none that fit this moment. "You would ruin yourself," he said, not quite a question. Sophie's eyes shone. "I would save myself." The Duke stared at her as if he did not know what creature stood before him. Then he asked, rougher than she expected, "Why?" Sophie's throat tightened, and for a second she almost told him the truth. Because I loved you, because you made me feel like a fool for it, because I cannot keep bleeding quietly just to keep everyone comfortable. But she remembered the hook of her own survival. She remembered the lie she had chosen like armor, so she lifted her chin and let the mask settle perfectly into place. Because, Sophie said, voice steady, I no longer love you. The Duke flinched, just slightly, but Sophie saw it, and as she walked past him toward the doors, her heart breaking in perfect silence, she heard him speak behind her. One last sentence, raw with something that sounded dangerously like panic. Then tell me, the Duke said, why does it feel like you are lying? Sophie's hand paused on the door. She did not turn around, but her breath caught, because the most terrifying thing was not that he doubted her. It was that for the first time, he was finally paying attention, and that was when she realized the game had begun, and she had no idea who would survive it with their heart intact. There are moments when pride feels like dignity until it is challenged. The Duke of Renford stood where Lady Sophie had left him, the echo of her words still lodged beneath his ribs like a splinter. I no longer love you. The sentence repeated itself, irritating, implausible, refusing to settle. He had heard harsher truths in Parliament, colder refusals in drawing rooms, but never had a single lie sounded so deliberate, a lie chosen. He turned slowly, watching the doors close behind her. The ballroom resumed its breath. Laughter returned. A violin dared to rise again, yet something had shifted. A thread pulled loose. Your Grace, someone ventured. He did not answer. His attention had narrowed to a single, maddening thought. She changed, not wept, not pleaded. Changed. He had expected tears. A scene, a letter written in heartbreak, perhaps, but certainly obedience. Sophie had been the gentlest constant in a life he had learned to treat as a negotiation table. She had smiled at him when he offered nothing. She had waited when he withdrew. She had accepted the arrangement with a faith that made him uncomfortable, because it reminded him how little choice he had ever been given. He had despised the arrangement. He had not despised her. And yet, when she said she no longer loved him, the lie struck deeper than any accusation could have. Renford, murmured Lord Ellington, sidling up with a glass. You look as though you've misplaced an heirloom. The Duke took the glass without looking. I've misplaced a certainty. Ellington raised a brow. Dangerous things, certainties, they tend to explode when dropped. The Duke's gaze returned to the doors. Did you hear what she said? Ellington smirked. The entire ballroom heard something. No one is certain what, which makes it delicious. The Duke finally looked at him. She ended the engagement. Ellington blinked. Then laughed once, short, incredulous. You're joking. I am not. Ellington's amusement dimmed into interest. Well, that is unprecedented. The Duke's jaw tightened. She claims she no longer loves me. Ellington tilted his head, studying the Duke's face with a predator's curiosity. And you believe her? The Duke did not answer at once. He drained his glass instead, the burn of it grounding him. I believe, he said finally, that she wishes me to believe her. Ellington's smile sharpened, which is far more dangerous. Across the room, whispers had begun their migration. Sophie's absence was noticed. Absences always are. A mother's stiff posture, a father's thunderous silence. The Tun was already stitching theories together with delighted cruelty. The Duke felt the first stirrings of something he despised. Curiosity. Sophie's carriage rattled through the streets with a violence that did not match her stillness. She sat straight-backed, hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing while everything inside her trembled. She had done it. She had said the words. She had walked away. The relief came in short, dizzying bursts, like air after being held under water too long. Then the grief arrived, heavy and precise, settling into the spaces the relief could not reach. She pressed her fingers together until her knuckles ached. "Do not cry yet," she told herself. "You chose this." Her maid, Eliza, sat opposite her, eyes wide and wet. "My lady, your mother will be furious." Sophie let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "She will survive, and His grace." Sophie closed her eyes. For a moment, the image returned uninvited. His face when she said it, the flicker of shock, the doubt. The question that followed her down the corridor like a ghost. "Why does it feel like you are lying?" Her throat tightened. "He will be confused," she said softly. "And that is not nothing." Eliza hesitated. "Do you regret it?" Sophie opened her eyes. The city passed by in blurred lantern light. "Ask me again tomorrow." The carriage slowed. Home loomed, a place of rules, expectations, and consequences. When the door opened, Sophie stepped out, as if crossing a threshold into a new life. The house swallowed her quickly. Footsteps echoed, voices hushed. The servants knew something had happened. They always did. Her father awaited her in the study. Lord Harrowmere did not raise his voice. He never did. His anger was quieter, heavier, built of disappointment sharpened into command. "Sophia," he said, using the name he reserved for serious matters. "Sit." She did. "You have embarrassed this family," he continued. "You have broken an agreement that predates your memory. You have—" "I have reclaimed my own," Sophie said gently. Silence followed. Her father studied her as if she were a foreign map. "You were raised to understand duty." "Yes." "And obedience." "No," Sophie said. "I was raised to understand kindness. Somewhere along the way, those became confused." His eyes hardened. "Do not moralize this." "You have risked everything." Sophie lifted her chin. "I risked nothing I was not already losing." Lady Harrowmere turned away, pressing a hand to her temple. "You loved him." "Yes," Sophie said, voice steady. "And I still might. But love that humiliates is not a virtue. It is a wound." Her father exhaled slowly. "You will be punished. I expected that. You will be watched." "I already was." "You will not attend the next 3 balls." Sophie's mouth curved faintly. "Then I will read." Her father frowned. "You will regret this defiance." Sophie rose, smoothing her skirts. "Perhaps, but regret, I am learning, is survivable." She curtsied. "Perfectly." Then she left. Upstairs, alone in her room, the composure cracked. Sophie pressed her back to the door and slid down, breath shuddering. Tears came then, not loud, not dramatic, but honest. She cried for the girl she had been, for the wedding she had imagined, for the man who might have loved her if he had not been taught to resent every choice made for him. She cried until exhaustion softened the ache. Then she stood. She crossed to the wardrobe and opened it wide. Creams, pastels, softness arranged like a prayer. She reached past them. Her fingers closed around a gown she had never worn in public. Deep green, tailored at the waist, daring in its simplicity. It was not improper. It was intentional. Sophie held it up and studied her reflection. If she must be spoken of, she would be spoken of accurately. The Duke did not sleep. He paced his study like a man hunting his own thoughts. Each step punctuated by irritation. Her letter lay open on the desk, neat, restrained, devastatingly polite. "I release you from an obligation neither of us chose." No blame, no plea. He had read it 6 times. His valet, Marcus, lingered by the door with the long-suffering patience of a man who had witnessed many storms. "Shall I prepare the morning schedule, Your Grace?" The Duke stopped. "Tell me something, Marcus." "Yes, sir." "When a woman says she no longer loves a man, what does she usually mean?" Marcus considered this with admirable seriousness. "It depends, sir." "On what?" "On whether she is trying to be believed." The Duke stared at him. "Go on." Marcus cleared his throat. Sometimes it means she has reached the end of her patience. Sometimes it means she is protecting herself. And sometimes, rarely, it means she is done. The Duke's hands curled. Which is she? Marcus met his gaze. The rare ones do not look you in the eye when they say it. The Duke exhaled, sharp. She looked at me. Yes, sir. And she walked away. Yes, sir. Marcus hesitated. May I speak freely? The Duke waved a hand. If you must. Marcus chose his words carefully. Lady Sophie has been waiting a long time to be noticed. The Duke's pride bristled. I noticed her. Marcus inclined his head. You observed her. There is a difference. The Duke turned away, anger flaring, and then cooling into something quieter, something unsettling. Leave me, he said. Marcus went. The Duke returned to the window. London slept beneath him, indifferent and vast. He realized, with a jolt, that for the first time in his life a choice had been made for him, and it had not come from his parents. It had come from the woman he assumed would always be there. The realization was humbling and infuriating. 2 days later, Sophie stepped back into society. The drawing room she entered was smaller, quieter, but no less observant. Conversations faltered. Teacups paused mid-air. Sophie wore the green. Her hair was styled simply, deliberately, no bows, no excessive adornment. She moved like a woman who had decided something and intended to see it through. Whispers bloomed. She looks different. She looks confident. She looks like trouble. Sophie smiled politely and accepted a cup of tea from Lady Finchley, whose curiosity hummed like a tuning fork. My dear, you look radiant. Freedom agrees with you. Sophie sipped. So I am discovering. A ripple of laughter, soft, approving. Then the air shifted. The Duke of Renford entered. He stopped when he saw her, truly saw her. The green suited her. The calm suited her. The absence of hopeful expectation in her eyes unsettled him more than anger ever could. Their gazes met. Sophie did not look away. She inclined her head, just enough to be civil. Then she turned back to her conversation. The Duke felt something snap. Curiosity had become attention. Attention was becoming something else. And as he took a step toward her, the thought struck him with unwelcome clarity. He had lost control of the story. And for the first time, he wanted it back. Not for pride, not for defiance, but because the woman who had walked away was beginning to look like the one thing he had never been allowed to choose. If society had a favorite sport, it would not be dancing. It would be watching women fall. And when Lady Sophie did not fall, did not wilt, did not retreat into obedient obscurity after breaking an engagement with a duke, the ton leaned forward in collective disbelief. Because a woman was not meant to survive that choice with grace. She was meant to be punished by silence. Instead, Sophie arrived everywhere looking quietly, alive. The morning salon at Lady Finchley's home buzzed like a hive disturbed by curiosity. Teacups clinked, fans fluttered. Words travelled faster than servants. She's wearing emerald again. She speaks as if she has nothing to lose. Do you think she regrets it? Sophie heard everything, and for the first time in her life, she did not rush to soften herself in response. She sat straight-backed on a pale sofa, sunlight catching in her hair, answering questions with warmth but no apology. She laughed easily, truly laughed, when Lord Ashford made a joke about London's talent for inventing tragedies where none were required. Well, Sophie said lightly, if I am to be a tragedy, I insist on being an entertaining one. Laughter followed, real laughter, not polite approval. Across the room, Lady Finchley watched with satisfied interest. My dear, she murmured when the laughter faded, you are becoming dangerous. Sophie smiled sweetly. I was always dangerous. I was simply quiet about it. And then, because life enjoys impeccable timing, the air shifted. The Duke of Renford had arrived. He entered without announcement, as if the room had been waiting for him to remember he existed. Conversations faltered, then resumed at a more performative volume. Sophie did not turn. She felt him before she saw him. That awareness, once a thrill, now landed differently, sharper, controlled. The Duke paused just inside the room. He had not planned to come. That, perhaps, was the most unsettling part. He told himself he was curious, that it was necessary to understand the damage she intended to cause, that it was his duty to assess the consequences of her defiance. But when his eyes found her, dressed in green again, laughing with her head tipped slightly back, something in him tightened with a sensation dangerously close to loss. She looked untouched by regret. That was unacceptable. He crossed the room with measured steps. "Lady Sophie." The room leaned in. Sophie turned, slowly, deliberately. She rose because courtesy demanded it, not because she felt small. "Your Grace," she said calmly. He inclined his head. "You appear well." "I am," she replied. "Thank you for noticing." The faintest flicker crossed his face. Irritation. Amusement? Something else? "You seem changed," he said. Sophie met his gaze without flinching. "So do you." A murmur rippled through the room. The Duke's mouth curved, not quite a smile. "You enjoy provoking me." Sophie's expression softened, not flirtatious, not cold, just honest. "No, I enjoy no longer fearing your disapproval." That landed. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You claim you no longer love me." "Yes, and yet you dress as if you wish to be seen." Sophie tilted her head. "By the world, Your Grace, not by you." The Duke's jaw tightened. "You were content to be unseen before." "I was content to be chosen," she corrected gently. "Those are not the same." Silence stretched. Lord Ashford, hovering nearby like a man enjoying theatre, cleared his throat. "Shall we all pretend this isn't the most interesting conversation in London?" A few guests laughed nervously. The Duke did not look away from Sophie. "You will regret this performance." Sophie's lips curved into a soft, knowing smile. "Perhaps, but at least it will be mine." She curtsied, flawless, unhurried, then turned back to Lady Finchley as if the Duke were simply another guest. The dismissal was exquisite. The Duke stood there for a heartbeat too long. Then, very slowly, he smiled, and that smile, rare, sharp, thoughtful, made several onlookers shiver, because it was not amused, it was interested. That afternoon, the ton exploded. By evening, Sophie was no longer merely scandalous. She was the diamond of the season, a diamond who refused to sparkle on command. Invitations multiplied, conversations followed her. Men listened when she spoke. Women watched her closely, some with admiration, some with warning. And the Duke watched her everywhere. He noticed how she spoke more boldly now, how she laughed more freely, how she did not search his face for approval the way she once had. It unsettled him, because control, once lost, is difficult to reclaim, and because the truth he had avoided for years pressed insistently at the edges of his pride. He had not hated the arrangement because it bound him. He had hated it because it required him to feel something he did not want to examine, and now Sophie had taken that feeling away from him, or so she claimed. That night, as Sophie prepared for bed, Eliza brushed her hair with careful strokes. "You were magnificent today, my lady." Sophie closed her eyes. "Was I cruel?" Eliza paused. "No, you were clear." Sophie exhaled. "Good. I am tired of being mistaken for weak simply because I am kind." She rose and crossed to the window, gazing out at London's glow. She thought of the Duke's eyes when she dismissed him. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself the ache in her chest was merely habit, not hope. And yet, somewhere in the city, a man who had never been denied anything of value realized that the one thing he could no longer command was the woman he was only just beginning to understand. And desire, when mixed with wounded pride, becomes a dangerous thing indeed. If there is one thing a duke is rarely taught, it is how to ask. The Duke of Renford had spent his life issuing commands, negotiating power, and enduring obligations disguised as privileges. Doors opened for him. People adjusted. Silence followed his displeasure like a trained servant. What no one had prepared him for was a door that did not open at all. Lady Sophie's. He stood in the hallway of Lady Finchley's residence 3 days after the salon incident, gloved hands clasped behind his back, irritation warring with something far more inconvenient. Anticipation. This is unnecessary, he told himself quietly. Marcus, who was standing a respectable distance away, raised a brow. Of course it is, sir. That is usually how life informs us we should proceed. The Duke ignored him. Lady Finchley's butler announced him with measured formality. The Duke stepped inside, posture impeccable, expression unreadable. Sophie was seated near the window, embroidering. The audacity of it, sitting there as if she had not overturned the natural order of his life. She looked up at the sound of his name, and for a split second, before control settled like silk over her features, surprise flickered across her face. It pleased him more than it should have. "Your Grace," she said, rising politely. He inclined his head. "Lady Sophie." Lady Finchley, watching like a cat near a bowl of cream, smiled brightly. "How unexpected! I shall fetch more tea." She left immediately. Traitor. Silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but charged. Sophie gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." The Duke did. He noticed, with irritation, that she did not ask why he had come, as if she already knew he would. "You have been busy," he said. Sophie resumed her embroidery. "London rarely rests. You are spoken of constantly." Her needle paused. "I imagine so. You seem to enjoy it." Sophie glanced up, eyes clear. "I enjoy being spoken of as a person rather than a possession." That landed harder than he expected. "I did not consider you a possession," he said sharply. Sophie returned to her work. "No, you considered me an inevitability." He leaned back slightly. "There is a difference." "Yes," she replied calmly. "An inevitability does not require care." The Duke inhaled slowly, mastering his temper. "You misjudge me." "Do I?" Sophie asked softly. "Or do I finally see you clearly?" Her composure unnerved him. The old Sophie would have softened that question with a smile, an apology, a retreat. This Sophie did not retreat. "You have made me the villain of your story," he said. "No," she answered gently. "I have simply stopped making excuses for you." That was unfair and true. "You claim I despised you," he said. "That is not accurate." Sophie set her embroidery aside at last and met his gaze fully. "Then tell me, Your Grace, when you laughed about our engagement, what did you mean?" His jaw tightened. He had not expected this conversation to be precise. "I despise the arrangement," he said. "The control, the certainty that my life was decided long before I was allowed to object." "And so," Sophie said quietly, "you punished the one person who accepted it with kindness." He flinched. She continued, not cruelly, not accusingly, just honestly. "I was safe to disregard. I would endure." "That is what everyone believed." His voice dropped. "You were wrong about one thing." Sophie waited. "I never thought you insignificant." Her chest tightened traitorously. "Then why," she asked, barely above a whisper, "did you make me feel invisible?" He had no immediate answer. The truth hovered, uncomfortable and sharp, because acknowledging her would have meant acknowledging what the arrangement demanded of him. Feeling vulnerability, choice. "I was a coward," he said finally. The word tasted unfamiliar. Sophie studied him for a long moment. "That is the most honest thing you have ever said to me." He straightened. "I did not come here to beg." Her lips curved faintly. "Of course not. I came to understand." Sophie stood and crossed to the window, folding her hands loosely. "Understanding does not undo harm." "No," he agreed, "but it may prevent more." She turned back to him. "What do you want from me now?" The question was direct, dangerously so. The Duke rose. He stopped a careful distance away, not crowding her, not retreating. "I want to know who you are becoming," he said, "because she is compelling." Sophie laughed softly. "You find me compelling now that I am no longer yours." He met her gaze steadily. "I find you compelling now that you are no longer silent." Something warm and painful bloomed in her chest. She stepped back slightly. "That is not enough. I know. Interest is not repentance. I know. And curiosity is not love." He hesitated. Then, quietly, "I know." Silence again. This one different. Sophie inhaled. "Then we are finished here." The Duke inclined his head, accepting the dismissal. "For now." As he turned to leave, she spoke again. "Your Grace?" He stopped. "You asked earlier why it felt like I was lying." He looked at her. "Because," she said, voice steady despite the tremor beneath it, "I was lying to survive, not to wound you." He nodded once and left. The Tun, of course, noticed, because the Tun notices everything. By the next morning, speculation blossomed like spring roses. The Duke called on her. Was she triumphant? Was he humbled? Did she forgive him? Sophie heard it all with weary amusement. She did not forgive. She did not forget. But something inside her shifted. Because for the first time he had looked at her not as an obligation, but as a woman standing in her own right. And that mattered more than she wanted to admit. That evening, Sophie attended a small musical gathering. She wore ivory this time, soft, elegant, confident. The Duke arrived late. When their eyes met across the room, something passed between them, unspoken, unfinished. He approached slowly, careful not to corner her. "Lady Sophie, Your Grace, may I have this dance?" The room went still. Sophie searched his face. She saw no command there, only request. She placed her hand in his. "Yes," she said. "One." The dance was different. He listened to her steps, adjusted to her rhythm. When she laughed at a misstep, he smiled without restraint. For a moment, just a moment, it felt dangerously like what might have been. As the music ended, he leaned in, voice low. "You are extraordinary." Sophie met his gaze. "I always was." And she walked away, leaving him smiling despite himself. Because some lessons are learned slowly, and some loves must be earned, not inherited. If pride could be measured, the Duke of Renford would have sworn he had already surrendered enough. He was wrong. The invitation arrived sealed in ivory wax, elegant and unmistakably provocative. The Harrington Winter Ball, an event famous not for its music, but for its ability to manufacture scandal with ruthless efficiency. Marcus read the card twice. "It appears," he said mildly, "that society wishes to observe whether your Grace has learned humility." The Duke adjusted his cufflinks. "Society may observe whatever it pleases." "What about Lady Sophie?" Marcus asked. The Duke paused. That hesitation, brief, involuntary, told him everything. Sophie had not intended to attend. That was the truth. She stood before her mirror, Eliza holding up gowns like possible futures. Soft rose, pearl grey, midnight blue. "Green," Eliza suggested carefully. Sophie shook her head. "Not tonight." She reached for black, cut cleanly, modest yet daring in its simplicity. Not mourning, authority. If they wished to stare, Sophie said quietly. "I will give them something worth studying." Eliza smiled. "The Duke will have opinions." Sophie met her own reflection. "He is welcome to them." The Harrington ballroom glittered like a jewel box shaken too hard. Music swelled, candles blazed, the tongue arrived hungry. And then Sophie entered. Conversations faltered, heads turned, whispers ignited. She moved with unhurried grace, acknowledging greetings, declining advances, smiling without yielding ground. She was not performing, she was choosing. The Duke saw her from across the room, and for the first time, he did not approach immediately. He watched. He noticed how she spoke to people who offered no advantage, how she laughed at the edges, not the center, how she commanded attention without demanding it. A gentleman near him murmured, amused, "Careful, Your Grace. It's said a woman who knows her worth is the most dangerous opponent in the room." The Duke did not look away. "She is not my opponent." The gentleman chuckled. "Then what is she?" The Duke's answer surprised even himself. "She is the standard." The dance card filled quickly. Sophie declined 3 requests before accepting one from Lord Ashford, because his humour came without expectation. "You look like a woman who enjoys causing palpitations," Ashford said cheerfully as they took their places. "I enjoy breathing freely," Sophie replied. "The palpitations are a side effect." They danced easily, laughter threading between steps. The room watched, and the Duke clenched his jaw. Marcus leaned in. "Would you like me to trip Lord Ashford, sir?" The Duke shot him a look. "Absolutely not." "A pity," Marcus said. "I was warming to the idea." The music ended. Ashford bowed theatrically. "If I survive tonight, I shall consider it a victory." Sophie smiled. "If you survive London, you deserve a medal." As Ashford stepped away, the Duke appeared. Not abrupt, not possessive. Measured. "Lady Sophie," he said, "may I steal a moment?" She considered him, really considered him, then nodded. "One." They moved toward a quiet alcove, still visible, still observed. He spoke first. "You are formidable tonight." She raised a brow. "Is that a compliment or a warning?" "Both," he admitted. Sophie folded her hands. "Then we are aligned." He hesitated. "You enjoy this?" "I enjoy myself," she corrected. "There is a difference." The Duke exhaled. "I am trying." She studied him, searching for pretense, and finding none. "Trying to what?" "To learn how to stand where you stand," he said quietly. "Without control." A spark of something warm flickered in her chest, quickly banked. "Learning is admirable," Sophie said, "but it is not the same as change." "I am changing," he said, slowly. She smiled faintly. "Slowly is acceptable. Backwards is not." The orchestra began another set. "Dance with me," he said. Not command, request. Sophie glanced at the floor, then back at him. "1, and you will follow." He nodded. "I will follow." They danced. And this time, he truly did. He adjusted to her tempo, listened to her breath. When she faltered, he steadied, without tightening his grip. It was dangerous. When the music ended, the air between them felt charged, intimate. He leaned in slightly. "If I asked you to consider me again..." She lifted a finger gently between them. "Do not." His eyes darkened. "Why?" "Because if you ask now," she said softly, "you ask from fear of loss, not from certainty of choice." He swallowed. She stepped back. "I will not be a reaction. I will be a decision." Before he could respond, Lady Harrington swept toward them, delighted. "My dear Sophie, you are the talk of the evening." Sophie smiled graciously. "I hope I am also the joy." Lady Harrington laughed. "That too." As Sophie moved away, the Duke watched her go, heart unsteady, pride bruised, resolve sharpening. Across the room, a group of gentlemen whispered bets were placed, predictions made. By the end of the season, one said, she'll forgive him. Another smirked, by the end of the month. The Duke heard, and for the first time in his life, he wanted to win not by conquest, but by becoming worthy of the prize. He straightened, eyes fixed on Sophie. This would not be a chase, it would be a transformation. And he had no idea how much it would cost him. There are battles that take place in ballrooms, and there are battles that take place far from applause, where reputations cannot shield the heart. Sophie had not expected to see the Duke again so soon. The invitation arrived that morning, not sealed in wax, not delivered with ceremony. It was brief, almost human. A visit to the East Borough Orphanage is planned for Thursday. Your presence has been requested. I will attend. Renford. No command. No assumption. A statement. Sophie read it twice. Eliza hovered. Will you go? Sophie folded the note carefully. Yes. Not because of him. Because the orphanage had been one of the few places where her heart had always felt useful. The East Borough lay beyond the polished streets of London, where stone lost its shine and life grew sharper around the edges. Children's laughter echoed against cracked walls, fierce and resilient. Sophie arrived first. She knelt without hesitation, greeting the children by name, listening to their stories as if each were the most important one she had ever heard. When the Duke arrived, he stopped just inside the gate. This was not a ballroom. No one bowed. No one whispered. A boy bumped into him without apology and ran on. The Duke stared, momentarily disarmed. Sophie noticed. She rose and approached him. You look uncertain. I am, he admitted. They do not care who I am. Sophie smiled gently. That is why I love it here. She guided him forward, not by the arm, but by presence. At first, he stood stiffly, unsure where to place his hands, his authority suddenly useless. Then a small girl tugged at his coat. Mister, she said seriously, you look sad. The Duke blinked. Do I? She nodded. You should sit. And just like that, he did. Sophie watched from across the room, something tender blooming in her chest as she saw him listen, truly listen, to children who demanded nothing but honesty. Later, as the children ran off to their lessons, silence settled between them. This place, he said quietly. You never spoke of it. Sophie shrugged. You never asked. He winced. They walked together through the narrow corridor, the sound of their footsteps softer now. I used to think love was endurance, Sophie said suddenly, that if I stayed kind long enough, I would be rewarded. He stopped walking. And now, he asked, and now, she continued, turning to face him, I believe love is mutual courage. He met her gaze. I was taught love was obligation. She nodded. Then we were both misled. Silence stretched, not heavy, but fragile. I'm afraid, he admitted, voice low, that I only learned your value once you were no longer promised to me. Sophie's breath caught. That fear, she said softly, is the beginning of truth, not its end. He stepped closer, careful, respectful. I am trying to learn how to choose you, not because I must, because I want to. Her heart beat hard. And what if, she whispered, I no longer wish to be chosen? He did not flinch. Then, he said, I will learn how to walk beside you without claiming you. The words dismantled something inside her. She looked away, blinking back emotion. That is new for me, he said quietly. Everything about you is new. A child's laughter echoed again, grounding them. Sophie exhaled slowly. Do not make promises you cannot keep. I will not, he replied. I will make efforts I can prove. They left the orphanage together, not touching, not retreating, Something fragile had formed, not love, not yet, but the space where love could safely grow. And Sophie realized, with equal parts hope and terror, that the man beside her was no longer chasing her shadow. He was beginning to meet her in the light. Scandal does not announce itself politely. It slips through open windows, settles into teacups, and smiles as it ruins lives with impeccable timing. Sophie sensed it before she heard it. There was a shift in the way conversations paused when she entered a room. Not curiosity this time, calculation. The kind that weighs a woman's worth against the pleasure of her fall. Lady Finchley received her that afternoon with an embrace that lingered a second too long. "My dear," she murmured, "we may need to sit." They did. Tea cooled untouched. "The whispers," Lady Finchley continued carefully, "have sharpened." Sophie inclined her head. "About me or about him?" Lady Finchley sighed. "About you, through him." The story spread quickly after that, like ink dropped into water. It was said that Sophie had broken the engagement not from dignity, but from ambition, that she had enticed another man, perhaps Lord Ashford, perhaps worse, that the Duke's coldness had been a convenient excuse, not a wound, and the cruelest addition of all, that she had played the innocent for years while scheming to rise higher. Sophie listened without interruption. When Lady Finchley finished, Sophie's hands were steady in her lap. "They need me to be a villain," she said quietly. "Otherwise, they must accept that a woman can leave without deceit." "Do you deny it?" Lady Finchley asked. "I deny none of my choices," Sophie replied, "only their lies." Across the city, the Duke received the same whispers, dressed differently. They called Sophie manipulative. They called him foolish. They suggested he had been humiliated, outplayed, relieved of a troublesome obligation by a woman cleverer than she appeared. Ellington delivered the news with a wince. "They are placing wagers, old friend, on whether you will defend her or let her burn." The Duke did not answer at once, because the choice, once abstract, had become viciously clear. Defend Sophie publicly and admit fault, admit weakness, admit he had failed her. Remain silent and allow society to do what it did best. He thought of the orphanage, of the way she knelt without fear of dirt, of the calm strength in her voice when she said mutual courage. Silence would wound her, and he had wounded her enough. That evening, the Harringtons hosted another gathering, smaller, sharper, the kind designed to confirm narratives. Sophie attended anyway. She entered with her head high, spine straight, wearing pale silver, unadorned, unmistakable. Eyes followed, murmurs bloomed. Then the Duke arrived, late, deliberately. When he crossed the room, it was not toward the men who waited for him. It was toward Sophie. The room stilled. He stopped before her, bowed, not deeply, but sincerely. "Lady Sophie," he said, voice clear enough to carry, "may I speak with you?" She met his gaze, pulse quickening. "Of course." He did not lower his voice. "I have heard what is being said," he continued, "and I will correct it." A collective breath held. Sophie's eyes widened just slightly. "You need not—" "I do," he said, gently but firmly. He turned, addressing the room. "Our engagement ended because I failed to honor the woman entrusted to me. Lady Sophie showed courage where I showed avoidance. If there is blame, it is mine." A ripple, shock, delight, disbelief. Sophie felt the floor tilt beneath her. He looked back at her. "I am sorry." The words, simple, public, landed like thunder. Silence followed, then whispers, not all approving. But something had changed. Sophie swallowed, emotion threatening her composure. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded once, then stepped back. He had chosen. And in doing so, he had ignited something far more dangerous than scandal. Hope. But as Sophie turned away, She did not see the woman watching from the edge of the room, eyes sharp, smile thin. Nor did she hear the murmured promise drifting behind silk and perfume. This is not over. Because when a woman refuses to be destroyed quietly, someone always decides to try harder. There is a moment, quiet, nearly invisible, when courage begins to cost more than fear ever did. For Sophie, it arrived disguised as kindness. The note was delivered the morning after the Duke's public apology, written in a careful hand, folded with deceptive gentleness. A private tea, just the two of us. I believe there has been a misunderstanding worth resolving. Lady Marbury was everything Sophie was not meant to challenge. Well-connected, widowed young, possessed of a smile that never quite reached the eyes. She had admired Sophie loudly in public. Too loudly, perhaps. Eliza frowned when Sophie read the note. "My lady, something about this feels sharp." Sophie considered the invitation. Declining would feed rumor. Accepting would invite scrutiny. "I will go," she said finally, "but not alone." Eliza brightened. "Shall I send word to—" "No," Sophie said gently, "not to the Duke." Because trust, she was learning, could not be borrowed. Lady Marbury's drawing room was intimate, tasteful, and very deliberately empty. Tea steamed. Biscuits waited untouched. "My dear Sophie," Lady Marbury said warmly, rising to greet her. "You look radiant. Freedom suits you." Sophie smiled politely, "As does honesty." Lady Marbury's smile tightened for a fraction of a second. "How refreshing." They sat. "I wish to speak privately," Lady Marbury continued, "because I so admire your bravery. Truly, ending an engagement with a duke. Deliciously bold." Sophie sipped her tea. "You wish to discuss admiration?" "Oh, no," Lady Marbury laughed softly. "I wish to discuss consequences." There it was. Lady Marbury leaned in. "London forgives men easily, women less so. And while the Duke's apology was noble, it has also made you vulnerable." Sophie met her gaze steadily. "I have been vulnerable my entire life. I simply stopped hiding it." Lady Marbury sighed. "Then allow me to offer protection." "From whom?" Sophie asked. "From the next version of the story," Lady Marbury replied smoothly. "One that paints you as manipulative rather than wounded." Sophie's pulse quickened. "And how would I prevent that?" Lady Marbury slid a folded paper across the table. "A statement, clarifying that your affection cooled naturally, that the Duke's apology was unnecessary, that no injustice occurred." Sophie looked down at the paper. A lie. A polished, convenient lie. "You wish me to erase myself," Sophie said quietly. Lady Marbury's eyes hardened. "I wish you to survive." Sophie lifted her gaze. "At the cost of truth." "At the cost of discomfort," Lady Marbury corrected. "The Duke will remain unmarred. You will be forgiven. Society will move on." Sophie stood. Her hands did not shake. "No," she said. Lady Marbury rose sharply. "Think carefully, my dear." "I am," Sophie replied. "For the first time." She turned to leave. Lady Marbury's voice followed her, silk wrapped around steel. "Then you will stand alone when the next whisper breaks." Sophie paused at the door. "I am not alone." She left without looking back. That evening, Sophie's composure fractured, not publicly, never that, but in the quiet safety of her room, where Eliza brushed her hair and the walls held no judgment. Sophie let the fear surface. "What if she is right?" Sophie whispered. "What if this is too much?" Eliza met her eyes in the mirror. "Then let it be too much, honestly." A knock sounded. Sophie's breath caught. "Who is it?" "Your Grace," came the voice from the other side of the door. Careful, respectful. Eliza smiled and slipped out. Sophie opened the door. The Duke stood there, not immaculate tonight, not armoured by formality. His coat was plain, his expression worried. "I heard," he said quietly. Sophie stiffened. "Heard what?" "That Lady Marbury called on you," he replied, "and that she is not known for mercy." Sophie folded her arms. "You came to rescue me?" "No," he said immediately. "I came to ask if you wished company." Her defences wavered. She stepped aside. They stood near the window, London breathing beyond the glass. She offered protection. Sophie said softly, "In exchange for my silence." His jaw tightened. "And you refused?" "Yes. Why?" he asked, not accusing, not leading. Curious. Sophie turned to him, eyes shining. "Because if I lie now, everything I have endured becomes meaningless." He studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Then I will not protect you by speaking over you." Her breath hitched. "What will you do?" "I will stand where you stand," he said, "and let the truth speak with your voice." The simplicity of it broke something open in her chest. "You trust me," she whispered. "I am learning how," he replied. "Every day, silence wrapped them, warm, fragile." She stepped closer, not touching, choosing. "This will get worse," she said. "I know. And you may lose more than reputation." "I know," she searched his face. "And if I change my mind," he smiled softly, "then I will change with you." Hope rose, terrifying, luminous. Outside, the city hummed, unaware that two people were deciding something far more dangerous than love. They were choosing truth. And somewhere, Lady Marbury prepared her next move, because trust, once claimed openly, invites its greatest test. There are lies that fade when exposed to light, and there are lies that fight back. The letter appeared everywhere at once, folded into invitations, passed beneath teacups, read aloud in voices lowered just enough to pretend restraint. It claimed to be written by Sophie's own hand, confessing ambition, manipulation, and a carefully planned escape from an advantageous engagement. It was devastating and brilliantly false. Sophie read it once, then again. Her hands trembled, not with doubt, but with fury so cold it felt like clarity. "They will believe this," Eliza whispered. Sophie folded the paper neatly. "Some will. Those who need it to be true." Within hours, the tongue divided. Some looked at Sophie with pity, others with triumph. Lady Marbury hosted a gathering that evening, ostensibly charitable, unmistakably strategic. Attendance was high, so was tension. Sophie chose to attend, not dressed for battle, dressed for truth. She entered alone. The room quieted. Lady Marbury smiled from across the room, satisfied, certain. Then the Duke arrived, not beside Sophie, behind her. And when he spoke, he did not raise his voice, because power does not require volume. "That letter," he said calmly, "is a forgery." Gasps. Lady Marbury laughed lightly. "Your Grace, surely. I commissioned the analysis myself," he continued. "Ink, hand, paper. None match Lady Sophie's correspondence, and I have affidavits from 2 clerks prepared to swear to its fabrication." The room erupted. Lady Marbury's smile cracked. Sophie stood still, heart pounding, not because she was being saved, but because she was being believed. The Duke turned to her. "Lady Sophie," he said clearly, "will you speak for yourself?" Every eye followed her. This was the moment fear once would have devoured her. Now it bowed. "Yes," Sophie said. She stepped forward. "I loved honestly," she said. "I endured quietly, and I left without deceit. If that threatens anyone's comfort, that is not my shame." Silence. Then murmurs. "Different now." Respect. Lady Marbury attempted a retreat that failed, because once truth is spoken plainly, it does not return to silence. That night, Sophie walked home lighter than she had ever felt, and for the first time, she did not walk alone. The season ended not with bells, but with exhalation. It ended the way most truths do, quietly, after the noise has exhausted itself. The ton moved on, as it always did. A misplaced glance, a rushed marriage, a fortune teetering on the edge of ruin. Attention shifted like a restless tide, leaving behind what it had once threatened to drown. What remained was Sophie and the Duke, not together in the way society preferred to consume stories, but near, intentionally near. They did not rush toward resolution. There were no grand declarations beneath chandeliers, no dramatic announcements crafted for applause. What grew between them required something far more difficult than passion. It required patience. They met in daylight now, walks through gardens stripped of spectacle, where winter had begun to loosen its grip. Bare branches reached toward the sky, honest in their emptiness, waiting without desperation for spring. "This is unfamiliar," Sophie said once, as they walked side by side, hands brushing but not yet joined. "What is," he asked. "Being wanted without being pursued," she replied. "It feels steady." He nodded. "Being allowed to stay without conquering feels the same." He did not reach for her hand. She noticed, and something in her softened, because restraint, when chosen freely, is a form of respect. They spoke of small things at first: books, music, the absurdity of certain traditions. He confessed he had never learned how to rest without guilt. She admitted she was still learning how to say no without apology. There were silences too, but these did not frighten her. Silence no longer meant neglect, it meant space. One afternoon, rain caught them by surprise. They took shelter beneath the stone archway of a closed garden, water drumming softly around them. He removed his coat without thinking and held it above her shoulders. She smiled, not dazzled, not grateful, simply warm. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," he replied. "I want to." The difference mattered. She studied him in that moment, the man he had been, the man he was becoming, the man who no longer filled space with authority, but with attention. "I am afraid sometimes," she said quietly. He turned to her. "Of me?" "No," she answered honestly. "Of forgetting who I am again." He absorbed that without defensiveness. "Then let us make forgetting impossible." She raised a brow. "And how do you propose we do that?" "By agreeing," he said slowly, "that neither of us becomes smaller so the other may feel larger." Her breath caught, not because the words were poetic, but because they were true. They reached her home as dusk settled, lanterns flickering awake. He did not follow her inside. That, too, was new. He stood at the gate, hands clasped behind his back as he once had in ballrooms. Only now there was no audience to impress. "Sophie," he said, voice low, certain, "there is something I must say, not as a duke, not as a man who wishes to reclaim anything." She waited. "I love you," he said, "not because you stayed, not because you forgave, but because you taught me how to choose with my eyes open." The words did not demand, they offered. Sophie felt the echo of her old self stir, the girl who would have rushed forward, heart unguarded, grateful to be loved at last. She honored her. Then she chose differently. She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel her warmth, but still free. "I love you too," she said softly, "but not at the cost of myself." He smiled, not wounded, not proud, relieved. "Good," he said. "Then love me only on the days it feels like truth." She laughed quietly. "I intend to." He did not kiss her immediately. Instead, he rested his forehead lightly against hers, a gesture so intimate it needed no witness. When they finally kissed, it was unhurried. No urgency, no claiming, just confirmation. Weeks later, a rumor surfaced, one last attempt at reduction. "She has tamed him," some said. "He has softened her," others countered. Sophie heard it and smiled, because both were wrong. No one had been tamed, no one had been softened into silence. What had happened was far more dangerous to the old world. Two people had chosen each other without permission. On the first day of spring, Sophie returned to the orphanage alone. She knelt, laughed, listened. When she rose, he was there at the door, waiting, not intruding. The children waved him inside like one of their own. That night, as they walked back through streets lit with new leaves and cautious hope, Sophie realized something profound. Love had not arrived when she was chosen. It arrived when she stopped waiting. And the Duke, no longer defined by what he had inherited, walked beside her not as a savior, not as a prize, but as a man who had learned that the bravest act is not pursuit, it is presence. And that is how their story settled, not into perfection, but into truth, a truth strong enough to last.